There's some great figures in Seattle history.
Drive through downtown and you'll see them. Denny, Yesler, Boren and Bell, the so-called founding fathers of our fair city.
Many of them are memorialized on our street names.
But legend has it a woman saved Seattle from utter failure. A woman perhaps more powerful, more prominent than the men we've come to learn about in our local history books. She was an immigrant. She was queer, and she ran a brothel.
Everybody in town knew her. She was frequently in the newspapers. People on the street could identify her by name. That's how important she was.
When we started digging deeper into her history, we found that how complicated it is to get any actual facts.
There is rumor that there is actually no real picture of her.
We need to do real research to find out who was Lou Graham.
Like many locals, Leonard Garfield has been mystified by the mythology of Madame Lou.
But the trail she's left behind has almost entirely disappeared.
As director of the Museum of History and Industry, it's Leonard's job to educate the public on Emerald City folklore.
I think Seattle is a place that actually loves the anti-hero.
Known as the Queen of the Lava Beds, Lou Graham wheeled and dealed within Seattle's seedy underbelly.
She was born in Germany, ended up in Seattle as a young person, stayed here until her 40s.
Liquor, gambling, and prostitution brought her great wealth, but also considerable influence.
And she really tried to present herself as a woman of the world.
Take a stroll through Pioneer Square and you'll find the bones of her bohemian bordello still remain. A gold placard on the brick facade acknowledges the former site of her sporting house. It's said, disguised as a house of seamstresses, she entertained government officials and members of Seattle's first families.
And if you walked into Lou Graham's bordello, it would be as if you were transported to Europe. The furniture was ornate, the women were beautifully dressed.
Lexi Bovee says if she was living back near the turn of the century, Graham would have likely employed her.
I have been a sex worker since 2016.
Lexi also identifies as queer, and for both those reasons,
I see it as this like cultural ancestor, this lineage, and I feel really proud to be connected to her in that way.
Tour guides here in town say Graham sought to elevate the women working under her, educating them in language, politics, and business. They were propped up more like high-end courtesans.
Women were facing similar types of oppression everywhere, and women were not allowed to have jobs. You had two options, and that was become a wife or become a prostitute.
Her former house of harlotry is now home to the Union Gospel Mission, and there's some irony in that. Graham built quite the reputation as a generous benefactor. Following the Great Fire,
A lot of banks weren't willing to lend to folks during the rebuilding because it was too risky. She went out on a limb to really rebuild the whole Pioneer Square area, and I think that her not giving up on the city after that type of destruction is something that's very inspiring to us.
Shayna Foley, general manager of the Crocodile Music Hall, stumbled upon Graham while on the search to name her newest concert venue. Like many others we've spoken with, she first heard the Madam's Tale from guides on Seattle's popular underground tour.
It caught on immediately, and we just thought, what a great way to honor a woman who has obviously had a large impact on the history of Seattle.
Not only is Madame Lou's inked onto the awning outside, the interior of this Belltown establishment was designed with her in mind. A collection of provocative curios from the late 1800s lines the descent leading to the stage. And then, right above it,
The mural at the top of the stairs.
in the foreground, an illustrious-looking Lou stands tall. In the background, Seattle burns.
She seemed like a fierce, independent woman in a time where you weren't necessarily looked at honorably for being fierce and independent.
Historians will tell you she was a phoenix, far ahead of her time.
She hired indigenous women. She hired Asian American women. There is some suggestion that she hired transgender people to work in her bordello. So she was a person who had a very diverse and inclusive perspective on human life, something we associate more with contemporary attitudes than we do with the 19th century.
Sex workers are a really marginalized group. You could potentially classify us as second-class citizens.
Speaking on behalf of other sex workers, Lexi shared stories like theirs are often ignored, even those of a legendary woman who once dominated the headlines.
Culturally, for a long time, we've shamed this community and we've shamed this work, but it's such an intrinsic part of our culture and our history.
I think as the 20th century wore on, we became uncomfortable with the notion that a woman running a house of prostitution could actually be considered a leading citizen. And so decade by decade, we began to erase our memory of Lou Graham and our real understanding of the role she played.
I think that it's really incredible and important to involve women in our history because we're so often left out of it.
All right, it's a talker. I know that's for sure. And I'm sure after just watching all of that, you've got a few questions, so hit me.
I certainly do,
Frankie.
myself, and I'm sure a lot of viewers out there want to know what happened to Madame Lou after all of that fame and notoriety.
Well, she passed away down in San Francisco. She did not die here in the city of Seattle. And when she passed, there was a number of her German family members that came from all across the world trying to get a piece of the pie. They wanted that money. They wanted the mansion that she owned in Capitol Hill. They tried to seize her assets, scrambling to get it, but their attempts were unfruitful. See, when she died, everything she owned was donated to what would later become Seattle Public Schools. And tour guides on Seattle's Underground Tour, they claim it was the largest donation to date to the school district until Bill Gates in the 80s or 90s.
So did she donate all that money? Like, was that the goal? Because it sounds like everybody's trying to grab at her fortune.
Yeah, and that's where it gets murky because there's not, as you heard, there's not a lot of records of her. And she was here in the country illegally. So there's not much of a paper trail as well, but we don't know really at this point what were her final wishes down in San Francisco. But hey, went to a good cause.
Boy, what a fascinating story, Lauren.
So fascinating. Thank you,
fun.
Lauren.
Yeah, thank you for indulging me.